Good evening. It's good to see everybody. I was originally thinking on doing either a Q&A or part 2 of the fruit of the Spirit, but it occurred to me that we are running low on Sunday nights if I'm going to be able to do what was suggested to me, because I like the suggestion. Someone has suggested the elders have talked about it, and I've met with the elders. The elders have met with me. We've met with the deacons, and obviously it's been kind of a different year and a half or so. Our Brothers Keepers program has been kind of just difficult to conduct as we typically do. So we have worked on revamping that and reorganizing, shuffling the groups as we always do. But someone suggested to me, it was just this past week, said, we have several folks that have never been a part of the Brothers Keepers program. They've placed membership or have obeyed the gospel. It's been a long time even for our regular long-time members because of all the COVID stuff and all that. So said, it might not be a bad idea to do something to kind of be, by way of reminder and talk about it and deal with that. And so, as I said, I kind of was thinking maybe I might do a Q&A tonight. I might do another lesson from the fruit of the Spirit. And then that suggestion was made, and I said, well, that's really a good idea, because those are all good points. We do have several people that have not been in the Brothers Keepers program, whether having placed membership recently or obeyed the gospel. We have some that had barely been involved in the program much before all the COVID craziness. So I thought that's a good idea. But of course, we have Brother Guyton Montgomery will be here, Lord willing, next Sunday night to talk to us about some of the things going on with Northwest Florida School of Biblical Studies. So I thought, well, I can't do it next Sunday night. And then, of course, the Sunday night after that is our gospel meeting. And the elders wanted to get our reshuffle done before the meeting. So I said, well, it's now or never. So I improvised and adapted, and I've come up with kind of a Q&A about Brothers Keepers. So that's what we're going to do tonight. I asked our leaders, and just to update the congregation, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, I guess, but just to go ahead and update everybody, it's been a few years, I guess. I can't remember exactly when we started. We've had deacons leading each group. We're going to do something a little different this time around and have a husband and wife team that is kind of serving as leaders of each group. We've done that before. It's just been a while. So we're going to do that again. One of the things that I did was I messaged all 4 couples who have volunteered to do that, and I said, could you think of any questions? It might be a question you have. It might be a question you could see somebody from the membership having pertinent to the Brothers Keepers program. Any question at all. And so what I wanted to do was to kind of approach this. Sometimes you go to a website and there's a section, and it's called, and usually in all caps, FAQ, Frequently Asked Questions. And so this is kind of a Brothers Keepers FAQ, or Frequently Asked Questions. These are certainly not every question. I tried to anticipate several questions I could think of. Got some really good ones from the various couples who are going to help lead groups. Some of those are a little more detailed, and we're going to deal with those probably within just the group settings. But some of these I think, would probably be questions that anybody might have. In fact, some of you I've approached and asked about being a leader, and some folks have said, I'm not opposed to it, I'm just not exactly right at this moment. Maybe there's something going on family-wise or whatever. And some have said, I don't mind doing that. I'm just not exactly sure what's going to be expected or whatever. And so, again, that's kind of the purpose of what we're looking at here. But this is all about the harvest. Jesus talks about the harvest is plenteous, but the laborers are few. We need more laborers to go out to reap the harvest of souls, but also to labor in the Lord's vineyard. And that's what Brothers Keepers is all about. So that said, here are some, what I would anticipate at least, are some frequently asked questions, and many of these, again, come right directly from some of our soon-to-be brothers, keepers, leaders. So here's a question that this a very general question, but this one also was suggested by one of our group leaders, and it's a very good question, and that's just kind of a general, what is the purpose of brothers keepers? They said, hey, I could see somebody having this question, like, why do we do this? Sometimes, is it not a fact that we have programs and things like that because, well, that's just what we've always done? Well, that's not a good reason. It's not necessarily a wrong reason, but it's, we don't. Sometimes people say that. Well, why do we have Wednesday night Bible study? Why do we have Sunday night services? Well, that's just what we've always done. Well, it's not wrong, but that's not really, there's more to it than that, in other words. So what's the purpose of a Brothers Keepers group? Is it just because, well, that's what we've always done? We haven't always done it. My understanding is Brother Sidney, I think, kind of spearheaded this. But is it just tradition? Sometimes, is it not also the case that people, congregations, corporations will have programs and things like that just because, for the sake of having a program? Well, that's not a good reason either. So what's the purpose of having brothers keepers and these particular groups? Well, there are opportunities to get to know each other better. That's one of the main purposes of the whole Brothers Keepers program. One of the things that I say this a lot, and it's true, I love Sundays, and I love getting to say hello to people, but what I also find myself saying so many times to so many different people is, sorry, I really wanted to talk to you more Sunday, but there were just a lot of people coming and going, and I was talking to this person, and then I turned around and you were gone. And it's hard, isn't it? Sometimes when you're in, at the back, maybe it's before services, maybe it's after services, and you get caught talking to one person, and maybe they can't hang around too long, and next thing you know, they're gone, and you didn't get to talk to them. There are opportunities with Brothers Keepers to get to know each other better without having to worry about, I got to make sure I catch them before they get gone Sunday or Wednesday. There are also the opportunities, and part of the purpose is to assist the elders in assessing congregational needs. Elders they're shepherds, and as we often have used, I can't remember, someone wrote a book, and the title was They Smell Like Sheep, talking about shepherds. They're among the sheep, and our elders do a good job of that, but still there are things that there are needs and situations that may arise that we could help facilitate making the elders aware of that earlier by means of these Brothers Keepers groups. There's also the objective, the purpose of serving one another in times of need, and especially in times of crisis. It's the idea of becoming a true spiritual family and better fulfilling Galatians 6:2. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. It's not to say you can't do that without Brothers Keepers, but it certainly helps to facilitate that and carry that out in a very wonderful way. Another purpose is to facilitate Christian faithfulness, but also Christian growth. We talked a little bit about growth and faithfulness this morning. I meant to bring it. I left it sitting on my desk. My daughter gave me this morning, Rachel gave me a piece of paper, and she had read it in a book recently, but she said something I said reminded her of this quote, and it was something to the effect of, when you are not a Christian, the devil is not really worried about you because he's got you. But when you become a Christian, he doesn't just, as we pointed out this morning, he doesn't just say, oh, well, I guess I got to move on. He kind of redoubles his effort. And now he's going to work even harder because he's lost one. And he's going to work as hard as he possibly can to get you back. And so one of the really imperative things for Christians is we must grow. And we need to be faithful in the Lord. Well, something like Brothers Keepers helps to facilitate the growth, helps facilitate faithfulness by having a smaller group, in this atmosphere of a smaller group. obviously, it's not as easy to have dialogue in a situation like this. Your preacher stands up and he preaches, and I tell people there's benefit in that, because sometimes you can get in a discussion type setting, and there's so much discussion that you really don't cover what you want to cover. But sometimes you need to have some back and forth, some dialogue. It may be question and answer, it may be discussion, it may be bouncing ideas off each other. But smaller groups, and in 2018, I put out a survey and had as many people as would go and do that, and several people did, to fill out various questions and answer various questions about Brothers Keepers. One of the things that I got so many times in responses was people like small groups. They are less intimidating. Even if we're not obviously in a worship setting with a preacher standing up preaching, there's not, the back and forth. But if we could say, we're going to have, such as Wednesday night class or Sunday morning, in a setting like this, even sometimes smaller, because our young folks a lot of times are downstairs. Some of our adults are down there teaching. Sometimes we have on Sunday mornings classes meeting in the fellowship hall. So even in a smaller setting like that, there's just something about that. People don't talk as much. It's like it's an intimidating, I don't know if intimidating is the word, but people like the smaller groups. It just facilitates opening up. It is more conducive to getting to know each other. And when we get to know each other better, then we grow closer as a spiritual family. That's the idea. But there's also the need to identify those who may be growing weak spiritually, those who may need encouragement. They may not be growing weak spiritually yet, but we may see a situation where I know they're going through a very difficult time, and we need to really be encouraging. And so again, it helps to facilitate faithfulness and growth by that smaller atmosphere. You take a congregation such as ours, not a huge congregation, but you break it into 4 groups, and that's obviously much smaller numbers. So that's kind of the general purpose, kind of continuing that thought a little bit, just looking at the biblical side of this. It is a biblical concept, this idea of being my brother's keeper. There are 2 passages I want to read. The first is in Ephesians chapter 4. In Ephesians chapter 4, there's a large context here we could read, but I'm just going to read 13 through 16. And here's what Paul says, and this all kind of centers around this idea of members one of another, brothers keepers. He says, "Till we all come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect or mature man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive. But speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying, building up of itself in love." It's about building up the body. It's about growing. It's about looking out for one another. Sometimes people almost have the idea like somebody trying to keep a watch on me. Well, yes, but not in the sense of, at least it better not be in the sense of, it shouldn't be in the sense of, I'm just, waiting so I can get on to you. No, it's being a spiritual family. And it's building one another up, encouraging one another. And that's kind of the aim of the program. That's the design of it based on what we read in the Scriptures. And again, there are other passages we could look at, but these are just a couple. 1 Corinthians 12 is the other one. And he begins in verse 20 in this context. Again, we could even read more of this larger context, but just for our time's sake, beginning at verse 20, and he says, now are they many members, yet but one body. We talked last Sunday morning about the oneness of the body. The eye cannot say unto the hand, I have no need of thee, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. He uses the human body as an illustration of members of the body of Christ. No one member says to another, well, we don't need you. I can't say, well, they don't need me. No, I'm not even going to be missed. Every person, every individual is vital because every individual represents and has and is a soul. And souls are important to God. And if we're going to be doing God's work and be God's people, souls had better be important to us. So he goes on and he says, nay, much more those members of the body which seem to be more feeble are necessary. And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, upon these we bestow more abundant honor, and our uncomely parts have more abundant comeliness. For our comely parts have no need, but God hath tempered the body together, having given more abundant honor to that part which lacked. That there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. And whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it. Or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. And then he says in verse 27, now ye are the body of Christ and members in particular. Well, sometimes what the point he's making here is sometimes the parts that we may not think of as pretty or beautiful, they're necessary. I heard one fellow say, if you don't think that, if you don't believe that, talk to somebody who's lost a pinky toe. I mean, that little old pinky toe, buddy, it'll mess you up if you lose your pinky toe. You got to like learning to walk all over again. I've heard of some people that had been through that, and they say, boy, it is a painful and difficult experience. But it's this idea of being members one of another. I forgot to bring that bullet up. That's the idea of brother's keeper. It's a biblical concept. We're members one of another, Romans 12, verse 5. So we, being many, are one body in Christ, and everyone members one of another. We're also family. There's this idea of the household of God. In Galatians 6:10, Paul says, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially those who are of the household of faith. That's the family of God, the household of God. Ephesians 2:19 says, now therefore you're no longer strangers and foreigners. He's writing to Christians. You're no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. And 1 Timothy 3:15, you probably know the verse. Paul says, if I tarry long, that thou mayest know how thou oughtest to behave thyself in the house of God. Sometimes, I remember sometimes as a boy, I'd hear somebody say, I see these youngins running in the building, and they need to read 1 Timothy 3:15 about how they ought to behave in the house of God. Well, listen, I don't think youngins ought to be running in the church building, but that's a different verse. And, there are different principles to apply to that. 1 Timothy 3:15 is talking about the household of God. It's not talking about a physical edifice or a physical room or building. It's the household of God, how to behave in the household of God, which is the church, he says, of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. So when we've obeyed the gospel, we are family. Well, as members of one another and his family, there ought to be love, relationship, there ought to be a closeness, and of course, there also ought to be a responsibility. I've often told people to think of it as a family, a physical family. If somebody you go to eat supper, you sit down as a family to eat supper one night, and somebody's missing, we don't just say, well, I hope he comes back soon. We're going to find out what's wrong. I mean, here's my spouse. They just didn't show up for supper. What's going on? Well, it may be that one of the kids speaks up and says, he says to let you know he's got to work late, or he's running by the store, be here shortly. There may be some very mundane explanation. There's no big deal. But we don't just ignore that, right? Sometimes in a spiritual family we do. Brothers Keepers helps us with that. It helps us to recognize responsibility and equally so opportunity to guard, look out for, look after, we might say, to keep one another safe, watch out for one another, protect and serve one another as brothers and sisters. I don't know if you grew up with siblings or not, but, kind of an interesting thing. It's sometimes humorous, even watching my own children sometimes. They could go after each other, I mean relentlessly sometimes. But somebody else says something, and I mean it's big brother or big sister's going to step in. And I tell you what, I just grew up with just me and my sister. She was 3 years older than me, and like she had a whole other side if she felt like somebody was mistreating me. And it was just, sometimes it would amaze me, especially how she could just come after me. I would see that side sometimes directed toward me. But if somebody messed with her brother, but she's got something to say about that. Well, it's the idea of looking out for one another. That's part of the purpose. Here's another question that was asked. How does the Brothers Keepers ministry fulfill these goals, the purpose that we've just looked at? How does it fulfill these? Well, the congregation is distributed, as I mentioned earlier, into 4 smaller groups. Everybody who's a member is in one of these 4 groups. Each team is led by a husband and wife team. This helps, it's the husbands and wives work together because sometimes their wives, especially in a situation maybe where it's a stay-at-home wife, and she may be able to help coordinate things while the husband is working, and maybe the one's working and the other one's not, and one's available, the other one's not. So it's a husband-wife team. They're working together to lead these groups. Obviously, the husband is kind of the leader of the group, but we have it as a husband and wife team because it works well that way as the husbands and wives work together to serve the group and the congregation. An elder and his wife will be in each group, 1 through 3, and those are, I always tell people, those are alphabetical. If you're in group 1, Jimmy and Jan will be in your group. And if you're in group 2, Martin and Connie will be in that group. And if you're in group 3, Chris and Connie will be in that group. And if you're in group 4, well, sorry, you get the preacher and his wife. But that's kind of with 3 elders. That's how we designed that, or how it was originally designed, and it's worked well, and so that's how it continues to be. So an elder and his wife will be in group 1, group 2, group 3, and then Reagan and I will be in group 4. Each group will be involved in all the different areas of service, understanding that, there are individuals in each group that have unique strengths, and that helps to balance each group. One of the great things about Brothers Keepers is you sometimes find out that somebody has a strength you didn't even know about before, and they just step up and they do something, and sometimes these are things that we wouldn't be aware of otherwise, and I've seen that over the years of being in Brothers Keepers myself. And it's really a neat thing to see, and to see people develop. Maybe there's not just a strength there per se to begin with, but it develops and it grows and it grows into a strength. There may be phone calls, cards, visits, maybe the sick, it may be bereaved, maybe widows, widowers. It could be those who are absentees. They've been missing services a lot, and we're trying to encourage them, check on them. Maybe new members, maybe new converts, whomever it may be. Each group is involved in all these different aspects. It's not like one group's going to be in charge of all phone calls, one group's in charge of all visits. You're dealing with all this within your group, those people. And then again, it's not to say you never go and have contact with anybody in another group, but there's the focus there within your group. And that's why we shuffle, because then you have different people in different groups at different times. Also, to use Brothers Keepers to develop evangelism contacts. The Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost, Jesus says, Luke 19:10. Everything we do has to be about that. Brothers Keepers is about seeking and saving the lost, and then once they are in the category of the saved, keeping the saved and helping them to grow and to develop and to mature spiritually. That's what it's all about. Everything has an eye toward helping souls get to heaven. There will be occasional group activities or maybe projects that are often useful in helping to carry out these goals, these objectives for the Brothers Keepers program. And so that kind of helps answer the question, how does this ministry, Brothers Keepers, fulfill those goals? Here's a question that was asked. I want to talk to group leaders just a moment, or maybe somebody might potentially be a group leader, and there are lots of folks that I've got. Some of you I've contacted, some of you are on my list, and I just haven't gotten to you yet. But there will be, no doubt, different ones who will lead. And sometimes people say, I'm not opposed to it. I don't know where, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Well, I'm glad you asked. What is expected of group leaders? You want to be aware of members' absences and follow up. It may just be that somebody's gone and you say, where was Billy Sunday? And so you call, and Billy was on the golf course. Well, we need to encourage Billy. But it may be that he just says, I wasn't feeling good. I was sick. Okay. Or it might be out of town. Billy never goes out of town, but, it might be somebody else goes out of town, check up on them. So I'm picking on Billy. But, it just find out what's going on. Sometimes it's just something that simple. I was out of town. I was visiting with someone. We were visiting with another congregation, whatever. But just finding out what's going on if somebody is not where they ought to be. Keep the elders apprised of spiritual needs within your group. Again, the elders a lot of times are going to know, and many times our elders are apprising me of spiritual needs, and really that's the way it ought to be, and it's one of the great things about elders, shepherds that are among the sheep. They're staying on top of things like that, but there will be times that within the group we may know of something and find out before the elders do, and we'll let them know about that, especially if it's a spiritual need that needs to be addressed. And sometimes somebody says, well, here's somebody, and there's an issue there. There's a sin issue, and I don't know what to do, and I'm really unsure how to handle that, and it's a little bit uncomfortable. We have elders. We have shepherds, and that's shepherd's duty, and our elders step up to the plate and stuff like that, but they've got to know. And so that's one of the great things is group leaders may find out about something, and they can pass that on to the elders, and the elders can address that. Also, group leaders, you want to keep the church office apprised of sickness. It may be a death, may be sickness, may be change of address. There may be physical needs. Well, it may be Sister So-and-so is she's sick, or it could be a widow, and the grass is getting bad, and she's not able to get out and cut her grass. Maybe doesn't have anybody to come and take care of that for her. Maybe in a financial situation where we can't just pay somebody to do that, so may need to find somebody to do that. Might be somebody within our group. Might be we need to get some people together. Sometimes people will coordinate with Carrie and Mary and others, and Good Samaritans sometimes can go out and do service projects and things like that. There may be a study prospect, a Bible study prospect that you can let somebody know about, let the church office know about, or let me know about, or one of the elders. Again, these are things that group leaders can help with. Group leaders are also, they'll be planning and conducting group meetings. This works well to do it with the week of your group number. Let me explain that just a little bit. I kind of condensed that to make it fit on one line. But in other words, if you're in group 1, it may work well to meet somewhere during the first week of the month. Group 2, the second week of the month. Group 3, the third. I don't know. Some people say they like that, and that's helpful. Some people say, I don't like being locked into that, and sometimes schedules are busy, and people say we're never able to get very many people at all together on that certain week, so we do a different week. That's fine. It's just sometimes that works well for some folks, sometimes it doesn't. If it's a fourth Sunday evening, we've always said kind of stay away from a fourth Sunday evening because those are typically reserved for youth devotionals. So try to stay away from that. But planning and conducting group meetings falls under the purview of group leaders. We also would say coordinating visits. Maybe a new member, maybe a new convert, maybe someone is sick, maybe someone is bereaved, maybe somebody's just discouraged and could use an encouraging visit. Could help coordinate that for someone within your group. Now, those are some of the responsibilities. I don't know that I'd say, and I wouldn't dare try to say that's exhaustive, but that's a pretty good look at responsibilities of group leaders. You may be, some of you that have agreed to be group leaders, you may be sitting there going, oh, okay. Some of you, if you're thinking about it, or maybe I've asked you already, you may be saying, boy, Chad, that sounds like leaders have a lot of responsibility. How could I possibly do all that? Well, here's the answer. You don't. Brothers Keepers is about teamwork, and it's about unity. I tell people, I say this a lot, and we have to remember this, and it's easy to forget this. Good leaders do not do everything themselves. They learn to delegate. That's not shirking responsibility. That's being a leader. Sometimes people will try to do everything themselves, and what will eventually happen before long is you will absolutely burn out. And sometimes people get discouraged and they quit. I've seen it happen where people, sometimes I've been doing this, preaching that is, well over 20 years now. And sometimes Several times I've talked to somebody and they'll talk about someone who hasn't been faithful in a long time, and they'll say, that brother was a worker. Man, he did this. He was in charge of that. He took care of this, that, and the other. And I mean, now one day he just stopped. He just fell away. A lot of times it's because this was somebody that just took everything upon themselves and absolutely burned out. And when you burn out, if you don't recognize it, if you don't do something, eventually you will crash and burn. And sometimes it happens, people crash and burn spiritually. You see it in business a lot, but you sometimes see it, you far too often see it, far more frequently than we should in the church. Good leaders don't do everything themselves. They learn to delegate. One of the other responsibilities of a group leader is to facilitate the growth of your group members by delegating different responsibilities to them. This actually helps your group. Let me tell you, there are folks, and we've done a personality study. That's been several years ago, but if you don't recall from that study, there are people, we would classify them as a sanguine personality, or even a choleric personality. They're the extroverts, and they're going to come to you and they're going to say, Robert, I'm in your group. What can I do to help you? You give me something to do, and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to help you facilitate, and I'm going to help our group to be the best it can possibly be. There are people that'll do that, and they're going to come right up to you, and they're going to say something like that, or they'll say, hey, anything you need, let me know. But you know what happens sometimes is, sometimes, again, it's personality. The group leader may be thinking, well, I know he said that, but I don't know, does he really mean that? And a lot of times that's the melancholy, right? They're going to overanalyze it. I mean, he says he wants to help, but does he really mean? I mean, this is a lot to ask. Do I really want to ask him to do that? Well, there are people that will offer to help, but there are also people, and by the way, if people offer, take advantage of that. Use that. If somebody says they're willing to serve, they're willing to serve. But there are also people that will, because they're not as extroverted, they will never come up to you and say, will you please put me to work? Will you please give me a job? Give me something to do. They won't do that. But if you come to them and you say, hey, look, I don't want to put too much on you, but I need some help with this. If you can help with it, great. If not, I'll look to somebody else. But here's what's going on. And they say, yes, absolutely. And they take it, as we say, they take the ball and they run with it. And they do excellent. Sometimes all that's missing is going and saying, hey, here's something that needs to be done, and I need some help with this. In that situation, that person says, absolutely. But what did Jesus say? You have not. Sorry, that would be James. Jesus says, ask and you shall receive. James says, you have not. Why? Because you ask not. And sometimes that applies to the Brothers Keeper setting as well. So remember that as a leader or as a potential leader, you can do so much for your group by finding folks, maybe those that come up to you, using them. It may be just kind of going to some of the other folks and just saying, hey, here's a need I need some help with. And they may jump right in and do excellent with that. When group leaders delegate, there's another benefit of the Brothers Keepers work, and that is members grow and develop. And again, it's so exciting to see over the years that, and I've seen it happen sometimes right here at Bremen, future congregational leaders many times develop. They may not be elders, at least not yet, but they may be growing into future potential elders, future deacons. There's so much potential there that often is just untapped potential because nobody ever just says, hey, could you help with this? So by all means, don't feel like as a leader, boy, I've got to do all these things myself. No. The best thing you can do for your group is get as many people involved in that work as possible. Another question. Okay, I thought I had repeated a slide. This is for the group members. I was addressing group leaders before. I thought I had messed up there. So another question that is frequently asked is, what is my responsibility as a group member? This also came from one of our group leaders when I asked for some ideas. Well, you can attend group meetings whenever you can, stir up one another, provoke to love and to good works, Hebrews 10:24. You could report sickness or death or things like that to your group leaders. Again, sometimes you may find out about something before the group leader even finds out. Sometimes it may be that Joyce or I find out about something and we may let a group leader know. But if you find out within your group, by all means, let your group leader know. You could help by visiting the sick, the bereaved, and so on, and assist in whatever way is possible. My responsibility as a member of a group is to report any evangelistic prospects to group leaders. Again, that may be a group leader, and they may pass it on to me. You may pass that on directly to me, or maybe directly on to the elders, whomever it may be, but especially to group leaders. Encourage those who are not active in Brothers Keepers to get involved, not out of just a sense of duty, but have a sense of growing together as a spiritual family. That's the whole idea. We want to involve as many people as possible, not so we can go and say, look, how many people? We got X percentage of our members involved. It's about growing together and being a family, a spiritual family. And then a responsibility of members is to assist the leaders with responsibilities, meetings, and so on. You can help in various ways. You can help to track attendance of members of the group. It might be you could do a devotional at a Brothers Keepers meeting. You could set up a visit, set up a project or something like that. There's so many different things that group members can do to help out their leaders. Well, another question that was asked is, how long is a couple responsible for leading their group? Well, it's a good question. Groups are shuffled every 6 months. For those that don't know, we've done it this way for, I guess, since the beginning. But every 6 months we shuffle, at which time there will be new leaders that are appointed, which leads me to another question. Somebody might say, I like leading, and I would prefer to serve longer. I feel like I'm getting the hang of this. I want to serve beyond the 6 months. Is that okay? Well, of course. But I will say this, probably 12 to 18 months will be the max you'd want to do that to avoid burnout. And we'd rotate you back in after, it may just be that you take 6 months off and then come back and lead again. But I don't want to burn anybody out. And so there's a lot. And also that idea of developing potential means rotating as many people through as we can. And we have a lot of potential great Brothers Keepers leaders right here within the congregation. How many meetings will there be? Somebody asked this. This was one of the questions that was submitted to me. How many meetings will there be? I'd say typically there's probably about one per month. There might be more or less based on the need. Sometimes in the summer's really busy and it's hard to get more than just one or two people or families that can meet. Sometimes people go ahead and meet with just those one or two families. Sometimes they say, we'll just hold off this month and we'll meet again. It might skip a month so we can get more people together. Sometimes you might have to have more than one meeting in a month because of some special need that arises. But typically it's going to be about one per month. Somebody may ask, where will the meetings be held? This is optional. In a member's home is ideal. But I also understand that's not feasible for some folks to have, 20, 30 people in their house. Some folks have more room for that. Some folks don't. So some meetings happen right here at the building, maybe in the fellowship hall. Some folks, we've had group meetings before where we'd go to a park, just a public park or something like that. And maybe one time I think we rented a pavilion or something like that and did a cookout. There are different things that can be done, but those are, meetings can be held in various places. Here's a question that was asked. I like this one. What can I do as a group member to help my Brothers Keepers leaders? Well, you could volunteer your time, volunteer your home, if that's an option, if you have the room. You could help track and follow up with attendance. You could offer to help make visits, phone calls, whatever it may be, coordinate this with others. You could be one of those people that says, hey, put me to work. I'll help coordinate these things, and I'll help divvy up the responsibility among the rest of the group, but I'll help take that off you so you don't have to worry about that as the leader. Just make your leaders aware that you want to help them out however. And I guarantee you they need the help, and they absolutely will appreciate the help, any help that they can get. So take advantage of that. And here I did mess up. I repeated that question. Here's a question that might be asked. There's been a death in our group. We want to feed the family before the funeral or after the funeral, whichever it may be, but there are a lot of people. to feed. What do we do? Well, we've pointed this out before, but just for folks that may not know or may not remember, if there's an extended illness or a death, the leader of the person or the family member's group will coordinate involvement for all Brothers Keepers groups in that. If there's something that's, it's extended or it's a large number to feed, then that's something where we get congregational involvement, because we don't want to strain too much one small group to provide that much food or whatever. Here was a good question that was asked. What does a typical Brothers Keepers gathering look like? What does a typical gathering look like? Well, there may be different versions of typical, I suppose, depending on who you ask, but usually there's going to be fellowship, and if I'm involved, there'll be food. There will usually be a devotional. A lot of times there'll be a devotional, and again, that's where sometimes leadership and skills are developed with different men giving devotionals at Brothers Keepers meetings. We've had some folks in the congregation that would go on to do Wednesday night devotionals, teach classes, sometimes starting off doing devotionals for Brothers Keepers meetings. Well, what about assessing group members' needs and planning action to address those needs? That happens a lot of times at a Brothers Keepers meeting. They may say, okay, let's talk about what's going on with folks. Does anybody know of a specific need that needs to be addressed? Somebody may speak up, say, well, Sister so-and-so has a need, Brother so-and-so has a need, this family has a need. So that's typically what a meeting will look like. Usually there's some fellowship, and sometimes the groups will eat first, and then they'll have a devotional, or sometimes they'll have a devotional and then eat. But usually they're going to talk about what's going on with the group and address and assess needs. Somebody may say, as a Brothers Keepers leader, how do I keep, this was one of the questions that was asked, and it's a great question. How do I keep enthusiasm up for this ministry as time goes on? Sometimes we revamp something, or especially if it's a brand new work or program, people get excited about it, and sometimes that kind of just wanes as time goes on. This is a great, great question. I don't pretend to have the be-all, end-all answer, but I will say this for the leaders: stay diligent, stay enthusiastic, and always remind your members of the importance of this work. There's an old saying, and it's true: people will never rise above the leadership. If the leadership gets burned out, or if they get unenthusiastic, then the members will. And so that's what leaders can do. That's not going to just magically make everybody else get on board. But if you don't do that, you can guarantee you're going to have problems. For the members and all of us, remember, it's all about people. I saw this one time, and I'll kind of close with this, because this is kind of where I wanted to close, because it is so difficult to keep people vested, if you will, in something like Brothers Keepers. Sometimes we get excited, and then we lose that enthusiasm. What we need to remember is it's all about people. And in Matthew chapter 9, the end of the chapter, there's some insight here as to how Jesus views people. In Matthew 9:35 through 38, Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. Jesus sees people as hurting or hopeless, or as a spiritual harvest. In verse 35, you see where Jesus looks out and he sees people who are hurting, and he's healing people, and he's helping them with their physical ailments. Brothers Keepers is all about people. When we look out at the people around us, people especially within our congregation, do we see people who are hurting, or do we just look and see a hindrance? We need to be like Jesus and see people who are hurting and do what we can to help them. But he goes on and says, Matthew records, when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. They were, we might say, hopeless. They were hopeless. Do we see people as hopeless, or do we just see them as hapless? Jesus saw people who didn't have hope spiritually, and he says, I'm come to give them hope. One of the great things about Brothers Keepers is it's all about people, and there are people who are many times, even within our own congregation, they're feeling hopeless, and they need that encouragement from something like Brothers Keepers and just being a spiritual family member to one another. And then finally, verses 37 and 38, he says to his disciples, Jesus does, The harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth laborers into his harvest. Jesus looks out and he sees a spiritual harvest. Folks, helping to harvest souls for the Lord, that's the greatest work in the world. May we never forget that. Brothers keepers, Christianity is all about people. As we close out tonight, as we pointed out in the very beginning, it's not just about numbers, it's not about percentages, it's about souls. Each one of us is a soul, and God is concerned with souls. What about your soul tonight? What about my soul? As we close out, let's examine ourselves and say, is my life right with God? Am I where I need to be spiritually? Are you where you need to be spiritually? And if not, are you going to make the necessary changes to be involved in Brothers Keepers and to be the best I can be in that, or any program like that? I've got to be where I need to be spiritually first and foremost. And so as we sing the invitation song, maybe you need to get right with the Lord, to become a Christian, or to come back as a wayward child of God, or maybe you just need prayers for strength, for encouragement. But for all of us, what a great opportunity we have as we kind of renew this program and revamp it to serve one another, to be members one of another, to be brothers keepers. Can we help you in some way spiritually tonight? If so, that's why the invitation is extended. Won't you come as we stand and sing?
Hear the sweet voice.